Hi everyone. Detective Lefebre speaks. The Silent Witness is a case of greed, corruption, and betrayal. Alice Munro's murder was initially a baffling mystery, but through meticulous forensic work, surveillance analysis, and relentless questioning, the truth emerged. Barrett's calculated murder unraveled under the weight of evidence, proving that even the most powerful cannot escape justice. It was a cold, misty November morning when a jogger stumbled upon the lifeless body of Alice Munro in a secluded clearing in Hawthorne Park. The fog clung to the ground, muffling sound and shrouding the area in eerie silence. Alice lay on her back, her arms outstretched as if posed. She was dressed in running gear, a black jacket, leggings, and sneakers. But the unnatural stillness of the scene suggested she hadn't been out for a casual jog. A scarf was knotted tightly around her neck, the primary indication of strangulation. Beside her, on the damp ground, lay a peculiar object, an antique pocket watch, its hands frozen at 10:47. The watch was clean despite the surrounding mud, as though it had been deliberately placed at the scene. The jogger, shaken, called 911, and within an hour, the area was cordoned off as a crime scene. The initial impression was unsettling. This wasn't a random attack. The careful positioning of the body and the presence of the pocket watch suggested a deliberate act, perhaps with a deeper meaning. When I arrived, the clearing was bathed in the pale light of the morning sun breaking through the fog. Forensics teams were meticulously documenting every detail. The first thing I noticed was the deliberate nature of the scene. Alice's body had been positioned too carefully for this to be a spontaneous crime. Her face was calm, almost serene, which clashed with the violent nature of strangulation. The scarf was tightly knotted, but there were no immediate signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds, no visible bruises on her hands or arms. It was as if she hadn't had the chance to fight back. Surrounding the body, the grass showed signs of disturbance, as though someone had dragged her into the clearing. A faint smear of blood on a nearby rock suggested she might have been injured before being strangled. The pocket watch was the most intriguing clue. Old, tarnished, and clearly out of place, it had an inscription on the back, EB. Inside the cover was a tiny, faded photograph of a man and a boy. The hands of the watch were stuck at 10:47, which appeared deliberate. I wondered, was the watch a signature or a message? Or had the killer left it intentionally to mislead us? The pocket watch became the first concrete lead. It was an object that didn't belong to Alice. It felt like a deliberate plant. But why? The initials EB didn't match her name, and her family confirmed they had never seen it before. It raised several questions. Was the killer trying to tell us something? Was it a signature, a calling card, or an attempt to frame someone else? The photograph inside the watch was equally puzzling. Though faded, it showed a man in a suit and a young boy standing in front of an old house. The image had no immediate connection to Alice, and tracing its origin would require painstaking research. As I examined the watch, I noticed one more detail. The hands of the clock had been manually stopped. This wasn't just a pocket watch left behind. It was a statement. The question was, what did 10:47 mean? Was it the time of death, or was it symbolic? Alice Munro was a 27-year-old investigative journalist known for her fearless reporting on corruption and criminal activity. Her colleagues at the Daily Courier described her as determined, intelligent, and unafraid to ruffle feathers. Her current project, however, was unusually secretive. Her editor hinted that she had been digging into a prominent local developer, Elijah Barrett, a man with deep pockets and a history of silencing critics. Alice's family described her as passionate but recently worried. Her father mentioned she had started locking her doors obsessively and looking over her shoulder. She said someone was following her, he recalled, his voice breaking. She thought she was being watched. Her phone records confirmed she had been working late nights, often making calls to unnamed sources. But her last night was a blank slate. No one knew where she had gone or why. The autopsy revealed critical information about how Alice had died. The cause of death was manual strangulation, as evidenced by deep bruising on her neck. The marks suggested strong hands, someone physically powerful. The medical examiner noted that the scarf around her neck had been tightened post-mortem, likely as part of the staging. Time of death was estimated between 9:30 and 11 p.m. based on body temperature and rigor mortis. A faint bruise on her upper arm suggested she had been grabbed forcefully, possibly during an initial confrontation. Interestingly, there were no defensive wounds, no scratches, no broken nails, implying she had been subdued before the attack, perhaps by surprise or through coercion. Toxicology tests showed no drugs or alcohol in her system. Alice had been sober and alert, which made her lack of resistance even more unusual. This indicated the killer either had her trust or caught her completely off guard. Tracing Alice's final movements became the next priority. CCTV footage from her apartment building showed her leaving at 8:15 p.m., dressed in running gear and carrying a folder. Her face betrayed a mix of determination and apprehension, as though she was heading into a critical meeting. At 8:50 p.m., Alice was captured entering Hawthorne Park. Following her on the footage was a tall figure wearing a long coat, staying several paces behind. The footage was grainy, but the man's deliberate pace suggested he was tailing her. At 9:05 p.m., the park's cameras caught Alice walking deeper into the wooded area, and the man followed. Neither appeared on camera again. This raised immediate questions. Did Alice go to the park for a meeting? Was the man following her someone she knew? Or was he stalking her? The folder she had carried was not found at the crime scene, adding another layer of mystery. If the killer took the folder, it suggested the crime was motivated not just by anger but by a need to silence her. Alice's apartment became a key area of focus. It was small, orderly, and unassuming, until I discovered her work desk. A clutter of notebooks, sticky notes, and documents pointed to her investigative work. Among these was a spiral-bound notebook labeled simply EB, the same initials engraved on the pocket watch. The contents of the notebook revealed Alice had been investigating Elijah Barrett, a wealthy real estate developer known for cutting corners and alleged ties to organized crime. The notes outlined a trail of fraud, inflated construction costs, bribery of city officials, and connections to missing persons who had reportedly opposed Barrett's projects. Alice was on the verge of exposing a major scandal. One page stood out. At the top were three names circled in red ink: Elijah Barrett, Rachel Keene, and James Proctor. Beneath these names were cryptic notes like "RK has proof" and "JP shadowed me." The notebook hinted that Rachel Keene, a whistleblower, might have held evidence against Barrett. James Proctor appeared to be someone following Alice. But why? Elijah Barrett was the kind of man who exuded control. I requested an interview at his sprawling office, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He welcomed me with a confident smile, but the tension in his posture betrayed annoyance. She was a nuisance, he admitted, referring to Alice, digging where she didn't belong, always looking for dirt on successful people. When I pressed him on her murder, his tone turned icy. I had nothing to do with it. I didn't even know the woman personally. Barrett claimed to have spent the night of Alice's murder at a high-profile gala. Several witnesses confirmed his presence, and security footage from the venue supported his alibi. Still, his irritation and deflection raised suspicion. He was a man accustomed to power and intimidation, and Alice had clearly rattled him. While Barrett was technically alibied, I wasn't convinced he was uninvolved. Alice's phone records from the night of her death revealed an 8-minute call at 7:52 p.m. with a number registered to Rachel Keene, one of the names in her notebook. Rachel was a former employee of Barrett's who had blown the whistle on unethical practices. However, Rachel had gone missing 2 weeks earlier, and her case was already under investigation. Rachel's apartment had been abandoned, her personal effects left behind as if she had fled in a hurry. Attempts to trace the call led to a dead end. Rachel's phone was disconnected the morning after Alice's murder. What had Rachel told Alice during their final conversation? Had she tipped Alice off to something dangerous? Or was she seeking protection? The next lead was James Proctor, the third name in Alice's notebook. Proctor was a private investigator who had been seen tailing Alice in recent weeks. I located him in a shabby office in a rundown part of town. Proctor's demeanor was casual, almost dismissive. "Yeah, I followed her," he admitted. "Barrett hired me. He wanted to know what she was up to." Proctor claimed his work was limited to surveillance, photographing Alice's movements and documenting her sources. "It's just business," he said, but something felt off. His financial records showed a recent influx of cash from an anonymous account, far more than Barrett would have paid for a simple shadowing job. And then there was the pocket watch. A pawnshop receipt in Proctor's office revealed he had sold the watch 2 months prior. Why had it turned up at the crime scene? Tracing the origin of the pocket watch became a priority. The pawnshop owner remembered it vividly. "That's a rare piece," he said, turning it over in his hands. "I bought it from a guy, nervous-looking, mid-40s. Said he needed quick cash." He described James Proctor almost perfectly. The revelation left me with 2 possibilities. Proctor planted the watch to mislead investigators, or he had been coerced into doing so. I pressed him about it in a second interview, but Proctor became evasive. "It's just a coincidence," he muttered. But his growing agitation suggested he was withholding more than he let on. Rachel Keene's missing persons case suddenly became central to Alice's murder. Investigating her abandoned apartment revealed signs of a hurried exit. Dishes were left unwashed, a suitcase was half-packed, and papers were scattered across her desk. Behind a vent cover, I found a hidden USB drive. The drive contained explosive information, financial records tying Barrett to illegal construction deals, bribes to city officials, and offshore accounts. One folder was titled Project Cover-Up, detailing suspicious payments to silence whistleblowers. But the most chilling discovery was an audio recording. Rachel's voice, trembling and tearful, said, "If you're listening to this, I'm probably dead. Barrett knows I have proof. Proctor knows everything. Don't trust him." James Proctor's behavior had become increasingly suspicious. Between the pawnshop receipt, Rachel Keene's audio message implicating him, and the unexplained influx of money in his accounts, it was clear he was more than just a hired observer. Confronting him with Rachel's statement, "Proctor knows everything," struck a nerve. "You don't understand," he snapped during interrogation, his composure cracking. "Barrett's not the kind of man you say no to. He gives you a job, you take it, or you disappear." Proctor admitted that Barrett had hired him to follow Alice and Rachel, document their movements, and report back. But the surveillance work didn't stop there. "It wasn't just following them," he confessed, lowering his voice. "I was supposed to make sure they didn't talk to anyone." When asked about the pocket watch, Proctor hesitated. "I left it there," he finally admitted. I thought it might send a message. Something to throw Barrett off, make him think I was loyal." This revelation opened up a chilling possibility. Was Proctor trying to signal Barrett, or was he attempting to manipulate the investigation? The forensic team provided a significant breakthrough by analyzing the skin cells found under Alice's fingernails. The results revealed 2 DNA profiles, Alice's own and an unknown male. The latter didn't match James Proctor or Elijah Barrett, but it suggested Alice had fought back, scratching her attacker during the struggle. The forensic botanist uncovered another clue. Pollen samples on Alice's shoes and jacket matched exotic flowers grown exclusively on the grounds of Barrett's private estate. This was damning evidence, placing Alice in a location Barrett denied she had ever been. Combined with Rachel's audio recording, it created a growing case against Barrett. Piecing together the timeline of the night Alice was murdered revealed a critical gap. Barrett's alibi placed him at a gala until 9:45 p.m. The estate, a 15-minute drive from Hawthorne Park, meant Barrett could have been in the park between 10 o'clock and 10:15 p.m., the estimated time of Alice's death. A closer review of traffic cameras near Hawthorne Park provided another clue. At 9:55 p.m., a black Mercedes matching the description of Barrett's car was spotted turning into the park's main entrance. This directly contradicted his claim that he went home after the gala. When confronted with this evidence, Barrett's irritation turned into visible anger. "You're grasping at straws," he said coldly. "I didn't kill anyone." A key breakthrough came when a homeless man who frequently camped in Hawthorne Park approached investigators. He was hesitant at first, clearly wary of the attention, but eventually shared what he had seen. "I was sitting by the trail," he said, "when I saw this fancy car, black, shiny, speed out of the park around 10:10 p.m. It was going too fast, like someone was in a real hurry." He described the driver as a man in a suit, though he couldn't make out details in the dark. The car description matched Barrett's Mercedes. Though the witness's statement wasn't definitive, it added weight to the mounting evidence placing Barrett at the scene. Barrett's cool facade began to crack when confronted with the new evidence. The pollen from his estate, the traffic footage, and the witness's testimony were too much to dismiss. He claimed ignorance about the pollen, saying, "Alice could have been on my property without me knowing." But his explanation rang hollow. Barrett was known for keeping his estate under tight security. The final blow came when his car was searched. In the trunk, forensic experts found fibers matching Alice's jacket and a faint bloodstain under the carpet. Barrett denied knowing how they got there, but it was clear the car had been used to transport Alice, either alive or after her death. When pressed further, Barrett's irritation turned to anger. "This is absurd," he shouted. "I don't have to answer these questions." But his outburst only solidified the growing belief that he was involved. The evidence pointed to a confrontation between Alice Monroe and Elijah Barrett on the night of her murder. Using Alice's notebook, Rachel Keene's recordings, and her last known movements, I reconstructed the events leading to her death. Rachel's final phone call to Alice had been a warning. Rachel had uncovered Barrett's financial crimes and his connections to missing whistleblowers. Alice had arranged to meet Barrett that night, intending to confront him and perhaps secure a statement for her article. However, Barrett's intentions were far from cooperative. Alice entered Hawthorne Park around 8:50 p.m., with Barrett arriving shortly after 10 p.m. in his black Mercedes. Barrett claimed during questioning that they only argued and parted ways, but the evidence said otherwise. The bruises on Alice's arms suggested she was grabbed forcefully, and the DNA under her fingernails indicated a struggle. It was clear Barrett didn't plan to let Alice walk away. Likely enraged by her accusations and terrified of the consequences of her exposé, he strangled her with his bare hands. The scarf was added later, part of a crude attempt to stage the scene. He then transported her body to the clearing in his car, ensuring it would be found far from his estate. James Proctor's involvement remained ambiguous. Rachel Keene's audio recording identified him as someone who knew everything, but how much he had been directly involved was unclear. Under increased pressure, Proctor provided additional details during a third interview. Proctor admitted that Barrett had hired him not just to follow Alice and Rachel, but to act as a safety net in case either of them became a liability. "He wanted me to clean up any loose ends," Proctor confessed, his voice trembling. "But I didn't kill her. By the time I got there, it was already done." According to Proctor, Barrett had summoned him to Hawthorne Park shortly after Alice's death, instructing him to ensure nothing was left behind. Proctor claimed he refused to tamper with the body, fearing it would implicate him directly. Instead, he left the pocket watch, a misguided attempt to create confusion or perhaps to send a veiled message to Barrett about his dissatisfaction with the arrangement. Proctor's partial cooperation earned him leniency, but his actions revealed just how deeply entangled he was in Barrett's schemes. The final breakthrough came when the DNA found under Alice's nails was retested with a broader familial comparison. This time, it revealed a partial match to James Proctor, indicating the unknown male DNA likely belonged to a close relative. Proctor's reaction to this news was immediate. He broke down, confessing to a secret he had kept for decades. "I'm his son," Proctor admitted, referring to Barrett. He revealed that he was the product of a brief affair Barrett had in his youth. Barrett had paid to keep Proctor and his mother quiet, providing financial support in exchange for their silence. As Proctor grew older, Barrett exploited this relationship, using his illegitimate son for morally gray and eventually illegal tasks. This revelation added a new dimension to the case. Barrett had manipulated Proctor into becoming an accomplice in his crimes, leveraging their shared blood as both incentive and leverage. While Proctor had followed orders for years, his guilt and resentment had grown. This led to his decision to leave the pocket watch at the scene, a subtle rebellion against his father's control. With mounting evidence, including Proctor's testimony, Barrett's DNA and Alice's nails, surveillance footage, and the forensic link to his car and estate, the case against Barrett was airtight. I secured a warrant for his arrest. The arrest took place at Barrett's estate, a symbol of his wealth and influence. As officers led him out in handcuffs, his face was a mask of fury and disbelief. "This is a setup," he shouted. But the evidence spoke louder than his protests. Barrett was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Proctor, though complicit, was offered a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation. Rachel Keene's USB drive and recordings tied Barrett to a series of financial crimes and disappearances, further solidifying his role as a ruthless manipulator willing to eliminate anyone who threatened him. Elijah Barrett's arrest was a spectacle that shook the city. At his opulent estate, police arrived with a warrant, flanked by media eager for a glimpse of the powerful man brought low. Barrett emerged from his home, dressed impeccably as always, but his composure cracked when he saw the cameras. "This is a smear campaign," he shouted as officers placed him in handcuffs. His fury was palpable, but the evidence was insurmountable. DNA under Alice's nails, forensic ties to his estate, his car's presence near Hawthorne Park, and Proctor's testimony wove an unshakable case. Barrett, a man used to controlling narratives, now faced a system that he couldn't manipulate. As the trial preparations began, investigators unearthed an even darker layer to Barrett's motive. Rachel Keene's USB drive, analyzed more thoroughly, revealed a disturbing pattern. Over the years, Barrett's whistleblowers hadn't simply vanished, they had been silenced. Payments to shadowy contractors and Proctor's own confessions confirmed that Barrett had orchestrated at least 2 disappearances before Alice. Rachel's murder, her body was eventually found buried in a shallow grave on Barrett's estate, was the clearest evidence of his ruthlessness. Alice's murder wasn't just about silencing her exposé on Barrett's financial fraud. It was also about tying up loose ends related to Rachel's death. Alice had pieced together the connection, making her a direct threat to Barrett's empire. Barrett's arrogance was his downfall. He believed his wealth, influence, and network of enforcers would protect him, but the careful work of forensic scientists, investigators, and whistleblowers exposed his trail of violence. The trial became a national sensation. Barrett's wealth and connections made him a household name, and the details of Alice's murder, her courageous investigation, the pocket watch as a twisted calling card, and Barrett's ties to Rachel Keene's death, captivated the public. Proctor took the stand as the star witness. His testimony about Barrett's manipulation, their father-son relationship, and the lengths Barrett went to protect his secrets painted a damning portrait of a man consumed by greed and power. Proctor's admission that he planted the pocket watch, hoping to subtly rebel against Barrett's control, became one of the most chilling revelations. Barrett's defense team tried to portray Alice as an ambitious journalist who pushed too far, but the weight of evidence left little room for doubt. The jury listened intently as Rachel's audio recording was played in court. "If you're listening to this, I'm probably dead. Barrett knows I have proof." The courtroom was silent as her words echoed through the room. After 6 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for only a day before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts. Barrett was convicted of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of financial fraud. The judge sentenced him to life without parole. Proctor, in exchange for his cooperation, received a reduced sentence. While his actions had contributed to the tragedy, his willingness to testify against Barrett ensured justice for Alice and Rachel. The courtroom erupted in quiet cheers from Alice's family and supporters as the verdict was read. Barrett, a man who had wielded immense power, now faced the ultimate defeat: a life stripped of freedom, wealth, and control. The silent witness case ended with justice, but the emotional toll was undeniable. Alice Munro's bravery in pursuing the truth, even at the cost of her life, exposed the corruption and violence of a man who had operated above the law for years. Her family established a foundation in her name, dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and investigative journalists. Proctor's sentencing, though lighter than many desired, highlighted the complexity of his role. He had been both a pawn and a perpetrator, his loyalty to Barrett forged by manipulation and fear. His testimony, however, ensured Barrett would never harm another person. For me, this case reinforced the value of persistence and meticulous investigation. The pocket watch, seemingly an odd trinket, became a vital thread in unraveling the truth. The forensic breakthroughs, witness testimonies, and digital evidence reminded me that even the most powerful individuals leave behind traces they cannot erase. If you like this story and want to watch more stories by Detective Lefebre, please subscribe to my channel and leave a comment below. Remember, The truth is in details.